Hello everyone, welcome to the Shared Services and Outsourcing Network Higher Education Shared Services Digital Event 2020. As you know, this event has replaced the original on-site event that was planned for Seattle on April 21st to the 22nd. The on-site event has been postponed and will now take place October 13th to the 15th. But due to popular demand, we've gone ahead with arranging and delivering this two-day digital event session, April 21st to 22nd, to share the content and engage with the Shared Services and Outsourcing Network community. The first session today is on creating your next-gen shared services for higher education. This session is going to focus on looking at the latest trends in shared services operating models globally, and specifically looking at how this next generation trend is relevant for shared services in higher education. Part of the topics and discussion items we'll be looking at are the latest macro trends, including those directly linked with COVID-19, and of course the economic downturn that we are experiencing or likely to experience as a result of that. How to expedite implementing and transforming shared service from what's traditionally a back office focused shared services operating model to what's called out there is one office operating model, and we're going to explain what that means and define it a little bit, which includes moving up the value chain and other components of the change in the operating model. And in talking of operating models, we're also going to talk about how to build more resilient operating models that are more shock resistant, can move towards this one office approach to shared services, and are leveraging new technologies and digitalization such as RPA, and more robust from a business continuity perspective. But we're also, as part of our session here today, going to be talking and referring back to getting the basics right of any shared services operating model, especially in the context of higher education. So the agenda for today is we're going to quickly do an introduction to myself, my colleague, and Chazey, and then we're going to talk about next generation shared services and digital workforce and some of the trends and developments that I've referred to already. Then Chaz will take over and he'll specifically dive into some of the higher education trends relevant to shared services, and we'll then also talk about building that more resilient operating model I referred to in my opening remarks. And then I'll take you back at the end and talk about a transformation roadmap which can help you support moving to the new next-gen shared services for higher education. My name is Phil Searle. I'm the founder and CEO of Chazey Partners, and I'll be joined today by my colleague Chaz Moore, who's a senior project manager from Chazey Partners, and we'll be running through the first session of today. So as a brief introduction to Chazey Partners, we're a global management consulting and advisory services business, founded in 2006, headquartered in California where I'm sitting today. Our main service offerings are in three pillars: what we call traditional shared services, broader business transformation, which includes things like business continuity planning and technology enablement, and specifically robotic process automation, which we've been involved with for the last 5 years and has become a greater and greater part of our service delivery solution set. We focus on a number of functional areas, including finance, HR, IT, procurement, customer operations, and help desk, but also across a broad range of business support functions. We believe that our unique difference is that we're practitioners first, we partner with all our clients, and we bring an expertise gained over many decades of operating shared services and other business transformation and operating models. As a brief overview on some of our clients, we can see on this slide we have clients throughout the world in both the public and private sectors, government and higher education. Including specifically, we have a significant amount of experience working with higher education. And as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, we've worked with many university systems, including a lot in the University of California system, the Iowa State University system, the Claremont University Consortium, and there are many other university systems throughout the United States and other public sector bodies. So now let's get into the meat of the presentation today. And I'm going to be covering the first section, talking about next generation shared services, latest trends in shared services relevant to higher education and the digital workforce. So what does next gen shared services actually mean? At a high level, it really means transforming your service delivery function from being an activity functional based focused organization to what we call as a service focus. That really means your organization is really all about delivering end-to-end service portfolio, end-to-end service delivery that's customer-centric, leverages the latest technologies, understands processes and business process improvement, leverages a robust client interaction framework, is streamlined and standardized as possible, and is proactive and actually is moving up the value chain. And that's where we talk about capable, agile, adaptable, efficient, and proactive. That's really what we mean. This new next-gen shared services organization is also positioned for scalable capacity and sustainable improvement. Therefore, it doesn't become stale. It's constantly looking to improve, grow, and develop along with the business, including leveraging some of the latest trends in hybrid workforces, pervasive performance management, and, of course, the latest in continuous improvement trends and opportunities. The next-gen shared services organization also, and critically, leverages the latest in digital technologies such as robotic process automation and broader intelligent automation, and we'll be coming back to that a little bit later. Finally, the next-gen shared services organization is really perceived and seen by the business and in the university world, by the university, as a value-adding business partner, a partner to the core service delivery, which in higher education really is focused around three key areas: education, research, and health. As part of these latest trends, shared services is really no longer just about being together in a central building. In the older sort of traditional shared services, a lot of it was around centralization from a locational perspective. But actually, if you go back to the original definition that we've been using for 20 years about shared services, it's the organization that provides non-core services, and actually today more core services, to the business, employing a specialist team, geographically unconstrained and focusing on the requirements of the internal client. It's the geographically unconstrained element that's changing and actually being developed more broadly. It's less about central from a locational perspective, although the central operating model and central reporting lines is still a very significant part of the enablement framework for shared services. As part of this, there's been a significant move, especially recently with the COVID-19 issues, to a more virtual, remote way of working around shared services. And that has actually been talked about as an opportunity in shared services for a long time, virtual shared services. And now it's becoming more of a reality with the next generation shared services. It's key, though, that when you do that, you still leverage a robust client interaction framework, you have a proper governance approach in place, and you really have a structured, efficiently organized, and centrally reporting line approach, even if you're not relying so much on physical co-location. Some of the related challenges around moving to virtual shared services are the additional focus on required collaboration when people aren't sitting right next to each other. And actually, historically, there has almost been a bit of an excuse not to do anything by calling something virtual shared services. And this links back to the point I was just making, that it's all about operating model, client interaction framework, governance, and reporting lines. If you get all of that right, and it's not just calling it shared services or virtual shared services, then this more decentralized virtual way of shared service delivery can work. And as part of this whole move, technology is an absolute prerequisite. Digitalization of records and transactions, telephony, document management, workflow, case management, performance management, all support this move to more remote virtual shared services. So what do we mean when we say that next-gen shared services is moving to one office? So what does one office really mean? Well, some of the trends we're seeing out there is that shared services have become more global. That doesn't really just mean global across countries, but it really means a global across the organization. It's definitely becoming more digital, and as I mentioned already, it's becoming more proactive. And this partnership between shared services and the core business, in inverted commas, and in higher education, we've already talked about that being education, research, and health. That partnership is becoming more and more important. And as part of its scope is expanding significantly, and the use and capture of data is also becoming far more valuable. And so we talk about sort of 7 areas around here. I've mentioned expanding scope and responsibility, more integration across service lines. We've definitely got a greater focus on innovation and productivity, which leads to obviously efficiencies, and you also, as I've mentioned, capturing and analyzing of data. There's new technology disruption around ERPs, RPA, robotic process automation, intelligent automation, social media, and mobile solutions. And actually, as a sort of broader trend, there's a bit of a slowdown reversal to what we call traditional business process outsourcing. Because this technology and closer to the business one office has actually allowed some of these services to come back closer to the business and be in-sourced rather than outsourced. There's also an accelerated development of what we call the centre of expertise and centre of excellence associated with value-add services, which tend to be a bit more professional and technical and less transactional administrative. There's been a growth in that in the one office. Robotic arbitrage, which really means the ability to arbitrage from higher cost to lower cost, has been enabled through the use of RPA, which actually again is driving the less need for offshore locations in the broader shared services world, and within the higher education world, the less need to maybe go to third parties to provide sort of perceived lower cost solutions. And then finally, there's a growing recognition and acceptance of what we're calling the hybrid workforce, which is really a mix of not just RPA and technology tools, but within the workforce itself, different skill levels, different competencies across the shared services organization, a mixture of human and digital workforce working together to provide a greater value offering to the higher education institution. As part of the move to next generation shared services, I've already touched a lot on technology and digital transformation. And with what's sometimes called the fourth industrial revolution, transformation really is becoming inevitable for higher education. This fourth industrial revolution is really about the very latest in technology that's using the latest in physical, digital and biological spheres, and includes things like artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, blockchain, nanotechnology, quantum computing, biotech, Internet of Things, 3D printing, and etc., and autonomous vehicles like the Tesla vehicles. That's really the fourth industrial revolution. Just as a point of reference, as you can see on this slide, the first industrial revolution was really about steam and water power. The second was really about mass production electricity. And the third was the original digital revolution, which involved new personal computers, the Internet, information and communications technology, broadband, etc. We're now in the fourth industrial revolution, and things are accelerating dramatically, and we're seeing in the shared services world much greater use of specifically robotic process automation, but definitely AI and other tools are growing in use. And for higher education, we would strongly recommend that higher education starts to leverage these new technologies as well, and it is actually being leveraged in many organizations today in higher education, and we'll refer back to those in a second. I've talked a little bit about robotic process automation within the new intelligent automation digitalization world. Just a little bit more detail on that. Robotic process automation is really about, as it says, automating processes. It's less about the robot, and it's definitely not talking about shiny little robots wandering around the warehouse. This is about automating processes through the use of specific software. Sometimes it's called other elements like repeatable process automation. We've heard the phrase used, but it is using new technology that is different to old technology. We're not going to be talking in detail about RPA and RPA software today in terms of its technology, but we are touching on it as part of this new next generation trend in shared services. Just a little bit more, RPA software can mimic or automate what we call routine transactional rules-based tasks. It's not about automating end-to-end processes necessarily, but it's about automating many of those manual-based processes that used to and still had to be done manually, even if you had an ERP system or other broad technologies. It's about transacting at the human interface level. And you can see it's commented on here. These bots transact with an IT application or with a website or both in the same way as a person would. And it's really done on a click-by-click action-by-action basis. And effectively, you train a bot to do the same as what a person would do. This new technology is becoming very valuable across all organizations and within shared services. And we're seeing its uptake a lot more actually in higher education. A couple of clients, for example, we've worked with recently that have implemented RPA and bots as part of their delivery within shared services include UC Berkeley and the University of California PATH Center down in Riverside, where they've leveraged bots to help with payroll, process automation, W-2s, onboarding processes, and we can see these across HR, finance, many other areas of the business and many other areas of higher education. we see it as a significant opportunity as part of next generation shared services for higher education. To workforce, and it's a little summarized on here, but on this slide I want to mainly focus on the bottom right. The current status of the digital workforce in higher education is fairly limited, although I have talked about a couple of good examples in RPA, and part of that has been because of some of the challenges around implementing this with multiple different platforms and inconsistent data across the business. Data is critical in managing any new digitalization tool, and there was also at some degree a limited trained resources within higher education. Adoption has been therefore relatively quite slow compared to the private sector, but things are definitely scaling up now, both in private sector and in higher education. And again, I just want to say this is a significant opportunity within the digital workforce space, which includes other areas such as AI, machine learning, cognitive, blockchain, and RPA. So in this next section, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Chaz Moore, who's going to be discussing the latest trends in higher education shared services, and we'll be linking back to some of the discussion already around what's going on with next generation shared services and the digital workforce. So with that, I'll hand over now to Chaz Moore.
Thank you, Phil, and hello to everyone. So here's a slide that is an updated slide that we've been showing at conferences for many years now, and it's comparing college tuition inflation as compared to the Consumer Price Index in the U.S. And you can see that the college tuition has been rising much faster than general inflation. It is interesting to see at the end of the curve that it does seem to be flattening for tuition, although we'll see how that trend continues over the next few years. This slide shows a chart that's provided by UNESCO, and it's showing school closures, including higher education across the world as a result of COVID-19. We can see that COVID-19 is having a dramatic impact across all industries, including higher education. Higher education institutions have been feeling the squeeze for many years now. That factor had just been accelerated with COVID-19. For example, state funding decreases have been a factor for a reality for many organizations. And as the federal and state and provincial governments move from reacting to the COVID-19 crisis and start trying to move to a new normal and repaying the stimulus, we can just expect that state funding could become more of a factor. Also, travel restrictions. Many organizations have benefited from non-resident students, and with travel restrictions, it's not clear when that's going to be removed. That's going to put a reality to budgets. It is interesting that the competition for campus versus virtual learning, the marketplace for students just got a lot larger, with organizations not just competing locally, but also across the country and across the world. Historical impact from the recession, from endowment decreases, campuses are growing and they have rising costs and they need to address that. We also have this move to online education, which is requiring institutions not only to invest in infrastructure and also to invest in training their faculty to give them the tools and skills so they can move to an online learning environment, but also the expectations of students are changing, because if they're not on site in a campus, they may have the expectation that tuition will be changing as a result of that, whereas organizations have fixed budgets, fixed facility, and fixed wages. So while fiscal capacity is not maintaining pace with rising costs and increasing expectations, all of this will drive the move to a digital workforce and shared services. So shared services is part of the solution, but barriers exist for any organization. So for example, legacy systems is definitely a factor for many higher ed organizations. Manual and messy processes. Teams can lack the skill set to embrace the new skills that they need, and also the culture to embrace things like performance measurement within their day-to-day work. That's particularly a factor in higher education. Higher education organizations are generally risk adverse to the complexity of change and taking risk in new service delivery models. It can be hard to invest and gain support for investment in back office services as opposed to the core services. Staff may be very comfortable with the way things are operating, although interestingly enough, we're seeing with COVID-19 and with the virtual shared services models that are essentially being developed on the fly, a lot of the barriers that seem to be insurmountable in the past have suddenly just collapsed. And so there is an opportunity here for organizations to define what the new normal will be. One example, we're working with the University of San Francisco, and they have a process of having new hires come in to do an onboarding interview to review their identification, to check their ID, do the oaths in person. Well, now they're doing those over Zoom meetings. And there's been a discussion about this is actually a more efficient process. The new hire can show their ID, show their certificates through the camera, and that's actually quite effective and will be at least an option moving forward when things move to a new normal. And then, of course, the lack of leadership sponsorship can be a key failure point for initiatives. In addition, higher education presents unique challenges for shared services. For example, transparency. So failures, if there is any issues or you hear about issues in other organizations, they're typically public and can sometimes be jumped up upon from other organizations as a reason not to do anything. Change management is very interesting in higher education and also in the healthcare organization, in which your faculty and medical professionals often have an implied veto on any change initiative. Another point I'd like to comment on is unique customers. The needs and requirements of staff, academics, postdoctoral students, researchers, healthcare professionals, and students are all very different, and your shared services need to be able to address the needs of all these organizations, all these people groups. There are several excellent examples of shared services today that exist in higher education, including many speakers at this event who will be representing, so there's many others. Higher education does tend to take a more conservative approach to shared services, limiting the scope and the transformative impact. A huge opportunity remains. So what are the macro trends we're expecting as a result of COVID-19? We'll refer to the greater demand for resilient operating models, such as those that come with shared services. Talking to one client, that many of you are reaching out to colleagues and organizations to check in with them. And I was talking to a manager of a shared services processing group. And I said, how are things going? And she was quite positive. Her team went remote very quickly. They had to grab computers off desks, grab laptops if they had them. And she said they had a backlog, and they've been able to address their backlog, been very productive. And so that really speaks to the performance measurement and strong management technique, the resilient operating model that they already had in place, which really effectively allowed them to do that virtual shared services when they needed to. Business continuity is no longer a theoretical best practice. It can have to be integrated into daily operations. Key consideration agreements, training, operations, drills, it's going to be quite prevalent and demanded. Redundant capacity, there's been a push to reduce redundant capacity. Well, what we're going to need to see now is redundant capacity that's scalable while maintaining efficiencies. And so the way to do that, for example, will be with a hybrid human digital workforce. Phil already mentioned RPA and IA, or Robotic Process Automation and Intelligent Automation. That's going to become standard practice. Remote working, we're seeing normal. It's likely become expected now as an option as we hire people. And that's actually going to have opportunities also to expand our workforce as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be someone local. State funding restrictions, we mentioned. Distance online learning is going to be interesting. And the changing student expectations as curriculum moves online. So how do we deal with that? Well, the digital workforce will help us address it. So what's the impact of the digitization of the workforce in higher education? A huge impact on people and delivery of core services. So in the back office, There's opportunity to free up staff capacity for more value-added work. Performance measurement, as the workforce becomes more digitized, more transparent, more data, performance measurement is going to be easier and expected, and it can be part of our day-to-day work. Transparency and compliance, we're going to be able to respond to information requests, actually know what is happening across our organizations. Improving student experience, the ability to document our knowledge so we don't lose institutional memory as people retire and leave the organization, moving up the value chain, and then this opportunity to define the new normal when we start to return to operations, more normal operations after the COVID-19 crisis. And then the delivery of core services for higher education. We've mentioned those already, distance and online learning, the changing workforce. So our curriculum will need to change in terms of what students need to learn in school and what they're expecting. And then the productivity of faculty will be an interesting factor because as learning moves online, factors like student engagement, the productivity, the number of students, faculty able to reach, the social media in terms of engaging with students. That's all going to become available as data, and it'll be interesting to see how higher ed organizations leverage that to improve their offerings. So the next section I'm also going to walk us through is building a resilient operating model. Whether we're trying to build efficiency into our existing models, get ready for virtual shared services, or get ready for the digital workforce. Before you move to a digital workforce, before you move to virtual shared services, it's critical to get the basics right. So the 4 critical success factors. When transformation initiatives move forward, there's often a consideration for technology and process. Training and looking at our organizations is a factor, although honestly with higher ed, often the people are what you have and they're very change resistant in terms of organizational structures. That may be changing now with COVID-19 as organizations see what they can do. But typically a blind spot can be the internal client and engaging the internal client in your transformation to make sure it's sustainable. To help organizations address this potential blind spot, Chazey Partners has developed a client interaction framework, which is 9 elements which work together to ensure that you're engaging with your client. So for example, account management, you're formally reaching out to your client, continuous improvement initiatives, formal mechanism for client feedback, performance reporting, performance measurement, process control, you're documenting your end-to-end processes. As we mentioned, as we move toward more virtual and digital models, performance measurement is going to be key. It's a critical part of next-gen shared services. So what do we mean by performance measurement? Well, that's a full framework of input, output, operational, individual KPI. So the input is what's coming in, measuring that client input to the process, the timely, standardized, and prescribed format. Output is your ultimate output, and then the operational is measuring the process, and typically operational KPIs can be potentially broken down to the individual level, which is also critically important if we move to remote workforces. This next slide shows a sample human resources next-gen operating model for higher education. So resiliency is a characteristic of next-gen shared services operating model, and it's leveraging building blocks based on leading practices. So clear workflow, clear line of escalation, leveraging best-in-class technology, an appropriate level of specialization to meet the needs of your client groups, and tiered levels of support, including self-service. A key part of the operating model are enabling functions. These embed the client interaction framework into your operating model, again, for that sustainable improvement, engaging the client. And so some of the examples here are embedded change management, a continuous improvement function, having technology embedded within your service, training, and also critically global business process owners, so they have that control of the policy and can drive standardization. So I just completed talking about the latest trends in higher education, including COVID-19, and building a resilient operating model. I hope that's been useful to you. This last section is going to be provided by Phil. I'm going to talk about some of the tips and tricks in doing transformation, and I'll turn it over to you. Phil?
Thank you very much, Chaz. Hopefully the content and the discussion so far has been very helpful. Just going to take this a few minutes now, just to talk about how you move forward with this transformation initiative and moving forward to next-gen shared services. And part of that is just learning lessons from those that have gone before you. And we've tried to capture a few of those lessons here. So I'm just going to run through a few of them just to point you in the right direction. First of all, make sure that you have a business case. We've been operating in shared services for many, many years, especially in public sector. There is sometimes an inclination not to need a robust business case. We feel that's a weakness, and you should always have a strong business case that's used both to support the decision-making process up front and then to track and ensure accountability as you move forward with this transformation or indeed any transformation, whether it involves shared services or technology or whatever. But as we move forward next generation shared services and the need to invest time and money and effort, a business case is going to be even more critical, but it will also track the benefits you're going to achieve from that. Second point on here on lessons learned is, remember, it's all about the internal customer or client. You've heard us use the expression, the word client, through this presentation today. Sometimes you can talk about the customer. And remember, for when you're in shared services, in higher education, it's all about the customer, whether that be the internal customer or the external customer. And of course, in higher education, your customer are your students, patients, the staff who work within higher education itself, and your broader community when you think about research. And then you need to adapt your model for next generation shared services to that. And the whole one office approach to next generation shared services really thinks about that. It starts to think about how do you meet the needs of these various customer groups. For example, when you're thinking about students, there's in many universities good examples of shared services. You see one-stop shop approaches to providing services to your students on a campus. That's a great example of what I'm talking about. Think about who your customer is. Think about the available process and technology to help deliver that. And then customize, in a way, your initiative within a standard framework to provide support to those customer groups. Of course, the customers in health and patients are different to those in students, in education, and different to those who you think more broadly about the community, and can be different for staff. But just remember, it's all ultimately about the customer, that customer of shared services. A few other things on here. Be careful about what we sometimes call quick fixes, where you run ahead with a quick fix rather than a solution. Quick fixes can be attractive, but it is ultimately about moving to a new operating model and distinguishing between the two. And quick fixes, in a way, is not the same as quick wins. Quick wins are a very great enablement tool, but quick fixes can sometimes actually break the operating model. So just think about that. In higher education, we've seen a lot of move forward with multifunctional rather than single functional shared services, and indeed in broader shared services that is a best practice. However, it's not necessary always. You can move at a functional level, although as we move more to the next-gen one-office approach and end-to-end, multifunctional is definitely the more preferred way to proceed. So that might include end-to-end processes, for example, hire to retire as an end-to-end process, or procure to pay as an end-to-end process, or employee experience within that, or actually student experience would be a great example of that, back to the one-stop shop. So multifunctional crosses functional silos to think about an end-to-end as a service approach. As we mentioned earlier on when we were talking about next-gen shared services, you're thinking about this as a service rather than functional. Again, consider how far up the value chain you want to go. Traditional shared services tends to be more transactional and administrative focused. More advanced shared services, as you start moving into global business services, etc., tends to be a little bit further up this value chain, tends to do more data and analytics and professional and technical type work. Again, don't do that till you're ready, but as we talk about next-gen shared services in the future and one office, you'll see that there's more of this value chain services being provided by shared services organizations. One area we sort of touched on, but is critical, is senior level executive sponsorship is key. That's always the case, has always been the case, will continue to be the case as you move forward with shared services. So you need to engage with that group and make sure you have their effective support. We talk about separating transformation from ongoing activities. That's important to make sure there's an appropriate focus on this. And then change management, as always, is going to be vital, especially in the environment that Chaz was talking about earlier, when some of the potential barriers to shared services can be more significant than maybe have been experienced in other areas, especially in a sort of traditional, sometimes siloed organization. I mean, as we touched on, shared services has been successful in higher education, and I've mentioned some examples of, for example, robotic process automation in shared services in higher education. Been successful, but it's definitely not prevalent, and there's definitely a lot of opportunity there. That links to the need for a multifaceted communication and advisory approach, and then that also feeds into this culture of change, service, and continuous improvement, not accepting the status quo, challenging the way things are always done around here, to use that well-worn expression. We need to start building some momentum and pushing forward and thinking about how we can continuously improve, especially, again, linking back to what Chaz was saying about some of the funding challenges that are faced in higher education today and are definitely going to be continued to face as an outcome from COVID-19 and some of the macroeconomic changes that are linked to COVID-19, and also linked to changes in higher education in general, and of course the looming and actually current recession that we're experiencing. And when you pull your team together to move forward with this, make sure you include appropriate representation for both academic and administrative side of the house. And assign your best resources to the project as much as you can. This is an exciting transformational initiative, shared services and next generation shared services, especially around digitalization, improvements in service delivery frameworks, using the latest tools and techniques, including things like Six Sigma and Lean, etc., which I know are prevalent in higher education. Pull them together and think about it and bring your best team, best people, and bring them to this initiative. Chaz has touched on this already. It is about end-to-end process owners. Make sure you assign appropriate end-to-end process individuals or groups or communities to make sure that things are looked end-to-end and holistically across traditional functions and silos and units and across academic versus campus, etc., and staff, etc. That's what we're really recommending. Offer end-to-end services as much as you can, as well as the more traditional non-core services, and try and pull them to the degree you can under one umbrella. So it's back to this service delivery framework, portfolio of services, etc., and try and have consistency so that your customers have clear ways of understanding the services that you provide, how they're costed, how they get gain from those services, how they request those services, how they receive those services. A consistent way of all of that is very important, and that links back to what Chaz was talking about, again, about the operating model and that whole example he showed on HR as an example HR operating model. Again, we've talked a little bit about silos, and we need to try and break those down, especially in the public sector and in higher education. The traditional silos and ways of doing things don't work so well in a transformational environment, in a digitized environment, and in a shared service environment. So we need to think about how best to move those out of the way. And then from the people perspective, both within shared services and in the broader institution, you have to, of course, think about succession planning, job rotation, new opportunities, and training. And especially as we move to what Chaz and I have been talking about here with the hybrid workforce, and there's different specializations. So within the operating model, you're not going to have just a large group of generalists. You're going to have some more specialist roles, some with partial general and specialist roles. So those training requirements will change. Those reporting line requirements will change. Those support lines will change. And so you need to think about that in the way you manage your people and your HR policies and procedures linked to shared services, which can actually enable and support broader transformational change across the entire institution. A couple of last points here on learning from those who've gone before. Firstly, remember that a project doesn't end with go live. There is a traditional view that somehow a project, when it's done, you can close up shop and pull your tent down and leave. No, you need to continue to review and stabilize and operate and transform and optimize. And that sort of links back to my very first point about a business case. You need to track and continue to track performance. And then as part of that, you can build your ongoing operational business and transformational plan. It's not a one-time thing. Transformation is prevalent today, and you need to think of it that way. And finally, this is really important. To do things to do something different, you need to do something different, and therefore you need to do things differently. That's the whole point. If you just try and continue the way things have always been done, or you try to continue to operate in the same silos that you've operated in, or with the same technologies or unintegrated processes, things won't change. So in other words, to make a change, you need to make a change. And if you think of it that way, you combine that with moving forward with some momentum, you can be very successful with shared services, and it can be a real enabler for many of the strategic goals of your institution, a higher education institution, including some of the challenges around funding, some of the challenges around services to your internal customer groups, and leveraging new technology. All of that can be enabled if you do things differently. So just in conclusion, and linking back to some of what we talked about during this session today, take the opportunity to leverage what's going on from this current transformation and COVID-19 and what's going on with recession. Take the opportunity to strengthen, well, actually critically, to initially assess your current operating model and then look to strengthen it. Understand how well you've documented your processes, understand how well you've captured all your requirements from your customers and how well your service delivery framework works today, and consider how to build on the aspects of remote working that's gone on today and leverage what we talked about earlier around the opportunity around virtual shared services, because the new normal will be different to the old normal, and shared services can absolutely be part of that. Lean into the new technologies such as RPA that we've talked about, and work on how to best leverage your hybrid workforce, which, as I mentioned earlier on, is a combination of use of technology and changing roles, specializations, etc., to support shared services and obviously the goals and the missions of your higher education institutions. Develop and distribute appropriate performance measurements, and look to benchmark both within your own organization, between functions and teams and schools and campuses, and across with your peers within the higher education system in general, and more broadly with what's going on in the private sector, to look at what opportunities there are. So look to benchmark and help that to set your targets and your goals, and then measure against those targets. And make sure you integrate business continuity planning best practice into operations. Again, the current crisis has absolutely highlighted that. Chaz has mentioned that. Business continuity planning is going to be critical. It is always critical, but it's going to be even more critical. And again, shared services can be a big part of that. So think about it not just for the current crisis, but in general. How do we support when there's an emergency or a crisis? We've talked about the client interaction framework, the 9 key components that Chaz talked to. Have a look at that. Make sure you fill in any gaps. You don't need to grade 10 on every single component, but if you're grading very low on all of those 9 components, then you have an issue around your service delivery framework, the robust operating model, the cost of your structure, the efficiency, productivity, etc. And again, I've mentioned this, there is a new normal. Think about what that's going to look like once the peak of this crisis has passed, and how you can actually leverage the transformational change. It's amazing how crises accelerate transformations that were already in place, or at least were starting to happen, and trends that were starting to happen. And I think that's definitely going to apply here as well. And then finally, as a recommendation from us, get started, move quickly, and be bold, because this train has left the station and things are moving very, very fast. As we've touched on, there is an opportunity here as well as a challenge, and we would encourage you all to grasp it and move ahead. So thank you all for your time today. We hope that was a very, very useful session for you. We're very happy to take questions now. Both myself and Chaz are online. We've been reviewing some of the questions that have been coming through while we've been presenting, and we're going to start looking and answering those questions now. But please keep them coming. We've got some time left to take those questions. Thank you. So Chaz, why don't we get things kicked off, and if I ask you a question, go ahead and ask you a question right now. So what do you think are the key challenges related to RPA and technology in higher education as we move towards this more next generation shared services? What specifically around RPA and intelligent automation? What would you see as the key challenges there, and how would you address them?
Thank you, Phil. Probably the first one is a lack of understanding of what robotic process automation is. There's a general presumption with higher education that it might be something more for the private sector or big organizations, and doesn't feel that it's necessarily relevant for higher education. There may be internal resistance to bringing in a third party. Internal information technology organization may want to make do with their existing tools. And there might be a general opposition that we've seen sometimes with higher education, that there is an opposition to anything that automates human activities and potentially not necessarily reduces FTE, but potentially increases capacity and productivity. It can be seen as an efficiency generator, which can just have a natural resistance sometimes. And then also there's a potential lack of investment dollars, and there's an assumption that RPA is expensive, and the reality is RPA project can be done quite quickly and quite cheaply.
Thank you.
And so with that,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Phil. I was just going to say, I'm wondering, Phil, is the spend on technology an issue in higher education, or do you think it's more about how that spend is used?
So before I answer that question, I just want to be clear. So if you guys have got a question, obviously it's not an open phone line, but you can enter it in on the Q&A tab. If you can enter a question here. They've started coming over the wires here, but just to let you know, we've got about 5 or so minutes when we can take questions. So if you guys have any questions, please enter those now. The first question I'm just going to come over the line here, Chaz, is how would we recommend demonstrating the value of RPA to senior leadership, which sort of links back to the question that we just asked just now, Chaz. That's a great question, and it's actually faced in private sector as well as in higher education. But it's linking back to one of the comments earlier about business case. Now, the good thing about RPA is the payback on those RPA solutions can be really, 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 really fast. And therefore, the business case should be a quick turnaround.
So Phil, right now you're silent, so I'm going to continue on answering that. And so
Phil and Chaz, are you there? It seems like we're having a bit of a technical issue, folks. Please stay tuned.
Yes, hello. Sorry about that. We had the line cut out for us. So going back to our question on demonstrating RPA to senior leadership, basically it makes sense to have that presentation, show a case study, and actually provide a budget of what can be done with a small amount. Certainly pilots can be done, and then linking organizations to other higher ed organizations, relevant organizations who have successfully completed projects which are relevant to them. Ultimately, it's understanding what senior management needs, what their concerns are, and addressing those.
So Chaz, it's Phil. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. My phone line just cut out, so thank you for the notes from a few of you to remind me of that, and thank you, Oscar. But I'm back online now, so appreciate that. There is a question that's come over about potentially giving a few examples of schools that are using RPA and what sort of transactions are being automated. We touched on that a little bit earlier, so we're actually working in the University of California system, and University of California Path Center down in Riverside has implemented a number of bots and RPA. UC Berkeley up in the Oakland area, Berkeley area, they're also implementing bots. The bots in Berkeley are around the onboarding process currently, which is the hiring and onboarding process, and linking to document management and files and associated receipt of documents and requirements associated with hiring individuals. So that's the first bot. We're moving ahead with implementing other bots as well. There are many universities actually moving ahead with bots, including University of Michigan. I understand that they have a program associated with implementing RPA. University of Calgary moved ahead with implementing bots in 2008. Arizona State University are moving ahead with that. So a number of University of Chicago. So there are a lot of universities that have started moving ahead with the implementation of RPA. And to answer the question about what sort of transactions are being automated, we're seeing a lot in the finance onboarding area, so hard to retire and some of the reporting and finance areas, and specifically at the UC Path Center, it was very much around the payroll benefits processing, like W-2 management, manual pay stubs, things like that. So when you move into the private sector, the opportunity around RPA is very, very broad. And if you think about anything associated with a process that would involve human doing a sort of routine process, which could include reporting or analysis or web scraping screens or getting data on a daily basis, the opportunity is huge. And we're seeing a lot moving into the front office as well around leveraging data and producing reports on a daily basis. We're seeing that too. So the opportunity is huge. You just got to make sure it's obviously a fit. And many universities have started to move forward with it as we proceed from there. Okay. Chaz, you want to take the next question?
Absolutely. So the question, should we wait to improve our operating model until after COVID-19 crisis has passed? And the quick answer is no. Now is the time to leverage that remote capacity. We have several clients who their day-to-day operations aren't suited necessarily. They don't have a necessarily robust operating model. They don't have the performance measurement. And so they've gone down to reduced activity, and they still have people at home and have this capacity. Now is a great time to do that assessment. Start documenting your processes, identifying your pain points, and moving forward. So there's a lot in the beginning part around assessment and design that can be done remotely, and that also builds skills for later. For example, the UC Path Center, they've been working for many years now on implementing, and they're going live with the University of California, San Francisco, San Diego, and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories in June. And they're proceeding through the COVID-19 crisis. 6 months ago, that would not have been considered possible, that it could be done remote go live, and now they are. So by moving forward, you build those skills, and you can actually do a lot remotely. COVID-19 really starting to break down barriers and tell us what we can do. Bill, do you want to do the next one?
Yeah, I'll take the next one. So the next question is, how do you move forward with a transformation when our institution has a preference for consensus decision-making and certain stakeholders maybe have implicit vetoes, e.g., for example, faculty and physicians? So that's a great question in the higher education space. The veto approach to change has been actually a challenge in public sector in general. Obviously, just to be clear, that's where we have a group who are involved with the decision-making, a community sometimes, and any one person can block the move forward, and they have effectively a veto. So that is a challenge in any transformation initiative, whether it be shared services or technology or any broad transformation. But in the space of next-gen and digital transformation, clearly it's also a potential challenge. So what we have to do is, again, we've touched a little bit, but make sure you engage the community so you don't have people out there who think they haven't been involved. So you're talking about collaboration and consultation to some degree, but you need to have a proper governance framework which has layers in it, which allows at the top the decisions to be made by the senior management of the steering committee. The steering committee needs to be the decision-making body, and that needs to have a relatively more limited number of people. But then they can have what we sometimes call a project board at the next level, which is a broader engagement community, which doesn't have a veto, but has a sort of voting approach that's then escalated to the steering committee as you move forward. So that's the governance, but you really need to get beyond the veto culture. It needs to be more sort of majority-driven leadership executed, because momentum is going to be critical, especially in the new world. As part of that, as I said, engagement still remains very, very important. Proving the value still remains very, very important. And engaging across the community is also important. But you have to try and eliminate the veto, veto culture that's existed historically in some institutions. Chad?
And Phil, I'll just add a little bit to that. I was in healthcare for several years in terms of that, and we were working with physicians, and they were an interesting group because even if you have physicians in your governance, if the individual frontline physician didn't agree with it, they would say, well, you didn't consult with me. And we find with higher education, faculty can be the same way. One of the strategies is gain sharing. So if there is a new program or another initiative that the faculty or physician would like to see, you can put forward a transformation initiative as a way of reinvesting back. So you're maybe putting some of the savings toward productivity or budget saving and part of it into expanding programs. And also, it's absolutely critical that you have a champion in senior leadership, which will help you work through those hurdles. Phil, how about you take the next question on tech? Oh, sorry?
One more question, and then we'll have to wrap it up. But I think you started asking me this question, Chaz. Is spend on technology an issue in higher education? The answer is, from our research and benchmark analysis over many years, is actually the dollar value of spend is not an issue. It's more about the efficiency and spread of that spend across the institution, which very much links into this comment around silos and individual decision-making groups, etc. Talked about. We could give you a number of examples of that in the university system. We probably don't have time here, but when you do it on a dollar-for-dollar basis, the actual spend is enough. It's actually the effective use of that spend and the sharing of technology platforms and best practices that's more the issue. So that's where, again, the sort of next gen and the shared service sharing in general comes in. As you look to leverage technology solutions across your institution, you can then combine and be more efficient and more effective and get economies of scale, etc. So to answer the question, it's not really about dollar spend, it's more about use of that spend. Okay, I think we're actually pretty much out of time, so thank you for the questions. Please feel free to continue to send questions to us, myself and Chaz, and we will endeavor to answer them. Phil Searle and Chaz Moore at Chazey Partners, so you can send those directly. One question we have, I'll try and answer now, is the presentation materials will also be made available after the digital conference. We'll leverage the SSON, Shared Services and Outsourcing Networking team, to make that happen. With that, thank you very much for your attendance today. I believe the next session is in a few minutes, but thank you very much for your attendance today. And as I say, the next session starts at 9 o'clock. So we'll hand back to the SSON team to take it from here. Thank you all for your time. Bye.
Thank you, Phil and Chaz, for a great presentation. Today.